terms of the stuff, hair balls or something, who knows? In terms of the stuff, deadlines remain unchangified, so quizzes part 1, all the quizzes covered in part 1, deadline is September 21st. Again, you can always do stuff ahead of time, and you can see like what each thing is about, what are deadlines, and just be sure to update them especially before the deadlines. Exam 1, quizzes part 2, October 19th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th. Exam 3, 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, a day that shall live in infamy. And exam 5, the final, if you need it, deadlines December 13th at 5 p.m. These are all end of day. The paper, for the draft, you can do as many as you wish until November 9th, +5 deadline, November 14th, end of day on Blackboard, emergency deadline for full credit, and then desperation deadline. Before pressing on to our new stuff, anything about the previous stuff, or stuff to be that needs more stuff? It's all the stuff. Okay, so last time we were looking at arguments, and we saw they are the brains of philosophy. And to do philosophy, at least in the Western style, involves arguing, and the paper, of course, involves doing an argument. And we'll see more about the paper in the future. The basic idea is to summarize these two arguments by Socrates and then assess them. And one of the arguments he gives is an analogy, specifically the horse trainer analogy. So you'll need the analogy stuff for the paper, but it's also a very useful argument outside of the paper, in philosophy in general, but also in life in general. If you can only have like one argument, which of course you can have as many as you want, this would be a really good one to have because it does so much stuff. Now, informally, people don't use the strict form. If someone's laying out a very exact philosophical argument, they may put out all the steps, but in normal writing and conversation, even if someone's making an argument by analogy, they typically won't do all this stuff. They'll just compare things. They'll say this is like this in these ways, so it's like this in these other ways. But if we want to be exact and formal, here's what an analogy would look like. It involves, of course, premises and has one and only one conclusion. Arguments, as we saw, they're kind of like, the premises are kind of like breadsticks, unlimited, at least in theory. And then in conclusion, there's but one and only one. So what you have is two things being compared. Thing X, thing Y. And X and Y are just variables for the things. X could be like the Roman Empire, and Y could be the United States. X could be the Trump administration, Y could be the Bush administration. X could be Cheetos, and Y could be not Cheetos. It could be anything you're comparing. But you have two things being compared, X and Y. First step is you establish that thing 1X has certain properties. And these are also variables. P, Q, and R could stand for anything. And it isn't, you wouldn't always just use the qualities. You get any number, but you got to put something down. So the idea is basically X has these properties. Second premise, you establish that thing 2, Y, has these properties as well. Whatever properties you're talking about. Premise 3, you establish or claim that X has the property you're concerned about, Z as well. So you conclude, because X and Y are alike in these ways, they're alike in that way. Put informally, you say X and Y are alike in these ways, X has got this, Y's got this too. Now, this method is extremely useful for arguing all across, the stuff. For example, it's really useful for arguing in ethics. One's effective way to make moral arguments is find something, whatever it is you want to talk about. Let's say the ethics of using drones, little things that fly around. Oh, they can swim around and run around too. Now, what you want to do is, if you want to argue about the ethics of drones, is find something similar your audience already agrees with, something already pretty well established, and then draw a comparison. Now, to use a simple example, suppose you have a question about drones and privacy, and the question is it morally okay to use drones to fly around and look at people. Well, one way to do it is do it by analogy. A drone is just, of course, technology. It makes it easier to get cameras into places. Also, of course, a ladder is a piece of technology that makes it easier to get to places to look at them. So, would it be morally okay for someone to put a ladder against the side of your dorm, house, or apartment building, climb up and peer at you when you're taking a shower? No, because that would be pretty well established that's wrong. Now, what about a drone flying up to the window and peeping in at you? Would that be similar?
Yeah, it should be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the person is not there in person, but they're using technology to reach a place they normally couldn't see. And so you'd argue, well, if climbing a ladder and peering into someone's shower is wrong, then flying your drone up to peer in would be wrong too. So by analogy, that would be wrong. So it's a pretty useful method. If you ever want to argue something's wrong or right, find something similar that your audience already accepts as being wrong or right.
Say a conclusion, like you said, Y has property Z. Say Y doesn't have property Z. Does that mean your premise is wrong?
Oh, if Y didn't, if it turns out that you're wrong about it, then yeah, something would have gone, well, the argument could still be good, because it's a good point. Because an inductive argument, all this could be true, but this could still turn out to be false. Now something could have gone wrong. So if you do this and this and this, and then it turns out, wow, I was wrong, there could have been something wrong with your argument. But weirdly, your argument could actually be pretty good, but just through induction, this could turn out to be wrong. Probably not the case, but it may be like maybe drones peeping through windows isn't wrong. Probably is, but there's a possibility that it may not be, because they're not exactly right. But yeah, good point. If this turns out to be incorrect, something probably went wrong in the logic. But again, even if you have a really good argument by analogy, the conclusion, because of the problem induction, could still be turned out to be wrong. Because there are people who might argue, well, yes, the ladder would be wrong, but the drone wouldn't be wrong, because the person's not really there in person. Just like with trespassing. Could you trespass with a drone?
Yeah.
In a way, yeah, but in a way, no. Because if I suppose like I'm playing frisbee with some friends, and I throw it, it goes over the fence and lands on someone's house. Am I trespassing?
Yeah. I mean, no, but
No.
but you're in videotaping seeing at the same time.
Yeah, because maybe the drone is different, because I'm controlling it and can see stuff. Maybe I am trespassing. But I could imagine, a smart lawyer, or even a dumb lawyer, arguing, no, sure, the drone was there, but it's no more trespassing than, another analogy, the frisbee, being on the roof. So we could agree about, we could have an argument where we say, it's alike, but someone may say, yeah, flying a drone in someone's property is trespassing. So I was like, well, no, because you're not really there. Yeah, it's an intrusion, but you're not really trespassing. And as you saw, it could go either way. Some people would think, yeah, that's still type of trespassing. Other people may say, well, no, it's probably something you shouldn't do, but not trespassing. Which also gives like an example of a legal analogy. One area this is also commonly used is law. And much of law involves, well, it's a lot of reading, lots and lots of reading. Which is funny, people tell me, I want to be a lawyer, but I hate reading. It's like, ooh, that's like saying you want to be a race car driver, but you hate driving. That's kind of most of what you do. Now, in law, what they typically do is the notion of precedent. The idea being, if you have a case that you're the lawyer for, and you want it to go a certain way, you find cases that went that way, and you present them before the judge. So if you're doing like a trespassing case, and you're defending someone who's accused of trespassing, you would find similar cases where the person was found innocent, and argue with the lawyer, argue before the judge and the jury that your case is like those cases. The defendant was found innocent in those cases, your client should be found innocent. And a lot of courtroom law is reading through books, finding analogies, and arguing that this precedent applies. And of course, applying, trying to get a job at the Supreme Court involves arguing you have no idea to answer any question, and you really can't say anything because it's all hypothetical. What a great job interview. I have no idea what I would do. Hire me anyways. I guess that's how I get hired. How would you teach your class? That's hypothetical. Now, also, final example, medical. Medical reasoning, a lot of it is actually also argument by analogy. So for example, suppose you go to medical school, then you have a patient who's, you've got like rash and itchiness all over their legs, and you ask them, what were you doing? They said, well, I was out, in the woods, and, did you go out in the bushes? Well, yeah, when I ran into these vines. And you'd say, well, it looks a lot like, the poison ivy I saw in medical school, so it's probably poison ivy. So a lot of doing diagnosis is basically comparing what you're seeing, in your patients with what you learn in medical school. This is like the poison ivy or flu or whatever I saw, therefore that is what this is. And of course it's an argument by analogy, so it can always go wrong. That's why there can be misdiagnoses, because medicine is inductive, not deductive. And if you've ever looked at like WebMD, which always ends with like, you're gonna die, that's where you're dead. That's what, yeah. But there are so many things that have the same symptoms. If you get a fever, aches, you could have anything from cold to being tired to anthrax poisoning, so, or cancer, pretty much everything. So those aren't super useful symptoms. So how do you tell when you get a good, a bad, or ugly one of these? Now, you'll have to, of course, apply this to the paper. So this is we'll go over the paper again in great detail. And this is part of what you do in the paper, assessing Socrates' argument by analogy. And the way you tell when you're building one, whether you had a good or bad one, or if you're taking someone's argument by analogy and assessing it, there are 3 standards. The first is how many qualities the 2 things have in common, just in terms of just numbers. Now, of course, just having a lot of things in common is important, but it's not the decisive factor. Because if you take pretty much any 2 things in the world, they'll have a lot of things in common. Like, me and this folder have a lot in common. We're both are here in this room. You can see both of us. We have a shape, size, density, mass, volume. It's got some hydrocarbons. I got some hydrocarbons. So there's all kinds of similarities. We're all hydrocarbons. Basically, we're hydrocarbons, it's hydrocarbons. It just means hydrogen and carbon and stuff. And so, lots of stuff in common. But you wouldn't conclude that because I'm a philosophy professor, that it's a philosophy professor. It's actually a history professor. Dr. Day, teacher of history. No, that's not true. Yeah, and so we have a lot of stuff in common, but it's not, inferring that, therefore, that's a philosophy professor to be a bad argument. Because of the second standard, there's the relevance of the shared properties. In other words, given the qualities that something has, are they relevant to what you're concerned with? So, in the case of like ethics, the concern would be, well, are the properties they share relevant to the morality? In the case of drawing inference about being a philosophy professor, yeah, me and the folder have a lot in common, but I got a PhD in philosophy, I'm talking about philosophy stuff, I'm in front of the room talking philosophy stuff, campus police aren't coming to arrest me for being in front of a room where I'm not supposed to be, etc. And my name is, on the, what I say my name is on the class thing. And none of that is true of the folder. Its qualities aren't relevant to being a professor. So in this case, we have a lot in common, but none of them are relevant to professorhood. And lastly, the question would be, do the things have differences that break the comparison? Things you'd say, well, no, that there are similarities, but the dissimilarities break it. And so battles over arguments by analogy come down to this. The gist of it, you could really kind of smush it down to one. The argument is stronger the more alike in the more ways the 2 things are, and weaker the less alike in the more ways they are. Or even more smushed, the more alike they are, the better, the less alike, the worse. And the battle over argument by analogy comes down to those qualities. And going back to the trespassing example, the kind of the battle would be, is flying a drone into someone's yard, is that enough like physical trespassing to be actual trespassing? You know, it's an intrusion. And again, someone who's arguing that it's not trespassing may use my frisbee analogy to counter that. Like, if I throw my frisbee, yeah, you know, my property's going over there, but I'm not trespassing. But someone could argue with the drone it's different because you can, you know, you're controlling the drone and you can see through the drone camera, so it's more like trespassing than not. So it's more like being there than not being there. In the case of law, the battle would be over, well, does that precedent really fit? So if you were to argue a trespassing case, if you are the defense attorney, the prosecution would try to argue that it's not like those cases where the person was innocent, it's like the cases where the person was found guilty. And you'd battle over like, which one is it most alike. So argument by analogy, inductive argument, that form, how it's assessed. And we'll see them again in the future. And again, it's this very useful method of argumentation, and whenever I'm like, gotta write some stuff, and I'm like, gotta crank out some words, I need an argument, if my last resort is always argument by analogy. Actually, it's kind of my first resort too. Before pressing on, anything about analogical argument or drones? It needs more stuff. Argument from by example. This involves arguing by giving examples. Now, just like with the argument by analogy or analogical argument, normal people at least, typically don't like talk like this. They're not going to say premise one. Example one is an example that supports claim P. Example two is an example that supports claim P. Therefore, claim P is true. What they'll do is they'll give a bunch of examples and then present their conclusion, or lead with their conclusion and present examples. For example, if you, well, it used to be when politicians were running against each other, one thing they would try to appeal to is having more political experience. That used to be a thing. And so what a person would do is if they're arguing for themselves, they would give examples of all their relevant experience. Back when Hillary Clinton was running for president, trying to run for president the first time, she was claiming she had more experience than now President Obama. But who's got more experience now? Sorry, that was me. And so what she was doing was laying out all the examples of all the things she had done. And trying to get, when she was arguing against him, she would try to argue that he didn't have examples of experience. And the same thing can be done, you know, today. So if someone's, you know, running for office, they might give examples of the office they held, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how could you use these philosophically? Well, in the paper, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the paper, one of the arguments Socrates gives is what's called the unintentional argument, where he says, you know, he couldn't be corrupting the youth because if he did so, they'd probably hurt him, but he doesn't want to be hurt, so he didn't do it intentionally. And so one way to argue for him is to find examples of cases where people corrupted people in which they were hurt. They came to a bad end. But it'd be an argument by example. You know, here is historical examples of people who corrupted people, came to a bad end, therefore, you know, corruptors come to a bad end. Now, if you disagree with Socrates, you'll see more of this in the future, you might find historical examples where people corrupted other people, but they never turned on them. So, for example, you might look at like Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, etc., who were terrible people and did terrible things, but their followers never turned on them. They never harmed all their followers. Therefore, you conclude that, you know, people can corrupt without being harmed. And the way this works is basically by weight of example. So how do you tell when you get a good one? Well, not surprisingly, if you're trying to prove something by weight of example, the more examples, the better. So if someone is running for office and they were claiming a lot of experience, the more experience they have better, if they're arguing that way. Interestingly now, though, experience is seen as a negative. The idea being that being an outsider is better. So you'd want to actually say, so sort of weirdly now, people would argue against their opponent, they have lots of experience, so you shouldn't vote for them. Secondly, of course, the examples must be relevant. And this can be a matter of great debate. For example, when Trump was running for president, people like Jeb, exclamation point, and Marco Rubio, I guess no explanation point, they claimed that, you know, Trump didn't have any political experience, which is true. He never held any office before. It's the same arguments they used against President Obama before he was president. They said he'd only been a senator, he has not enough experience. Now, back when experience, I guess, kind of mattered, people said, well, Trump doesn't have political experience, but he had what? Yeah, business experience. You know, he'd run, several casinos, sold steak, ran a university, etc. Yeah, and the claim is, well, he has all of his business experience, and that's relevant. That's better than political experience. But of course, people who thought, you need political experience to have political experience, they argued against that. So whether an example is relevant or not can be a matter of considerable debate. And again, like with politics, what actually counts as relevant experience? Thirdly, the examples have to be specific and clearly identified. Because sometimes people will give, examples that aren't really examples. They'll just kind of vaguely point towards, accusations about misdeeds, etc., or vaguely point towards things they supposedly have done without clearly identifying them. And you can't really assess an argument by example without knowing what exactly the examples are. So if someone claims to be like super experienced, in politics or business, you'd want particular examples. If someone says, yeah, I got super experience, I'm the best. You'd say, well, what kind of best things do you have experience, does one have experience in? Lastly, just like with an argument by analogy, where you consider dissimilarities, with an argument by example, you consider counterexamples. These will be examples that go against what you're trying to prove. Now you may wonder, if you're making an argument, why would you, as a practical matter, want to consider things like relevant differences or counterexamples? Because that'd be kind of like in a boxing match saying to someone, yeah, my left is a little weak, so really punch towards the left side of my face, and that would seem like a bad idea. But in the case of arguing, again, philosophically, the goal is truth. So honesty is important. The goal is not to win, the goal is truth. Also, even if you have the goal of winning, considering counterexamples, considering dissimilarities can actually be effective, because one, it shows that you've considered the opposing view, and even more importantly, what this does is you bring up the problem, the defect, with you being in control of it. It's kind of like having a tiger on the loose, but you've got one of those control sticks on the tiger. I mean, it's better not to have the tiger roaming around, but if it's going to be roaming around, it's better to have it at the end of a pole than free roaming, around you. And this is, to use a kind of a metaphor, it's kind of like with political scandals. One thing that usually nails people about scandals in politics is not so much what they did originally, it's what?
But that was involved in.
Yeah, it's after it comes out, they it comes out it said, this person did this thing, and the politician usually the first step is what? Oh no, I didn't do that. And they kind of lose control of it. So often the cover-up is worse than the scandal. And what this does is not to say that a counterexample is a scandal, but the idea is if you bring it up, you've got control over it. And so when someone's reading, they'll think, oh, wait, they've already covered it. Problem solved. And also from a purely practical standpoint, if you got to hit a word count, one thing I learned as a very useful thing as a student was if you have to hit so many words in a paper, 20 pages or something, one easy way to do this is consider objections. It's your view. And that just creates more words, because you object, reply, check your word count, and keep doing that to hit that word count, then done, great. So that's the argument by example. Now again, it's useful in philosophy, but also quite useful in, again, real life. When people try to argue that someone, lacks experience, so you shouldn't vote for them, or they're like a liberal, so you shouldn't vote for them. They do this by giving examples. And when you see the upcoming battle, between Gillum and DeSantis, they'll be using arguments by example. They typically won't come out and say, here I am presenting an argument by example, because that would be terrible. But they'll be doing them. Like when DeSantis is going to talk about it, Gillum is going to be all progressive and socialist. He'll give examples there, and Gillum will counter against DeSantis, giving examples of bad things that DeSantis supposedly believes or has done. And there are arguments by examples, with the claim being, don't vote for that guy, vote for me. And they give examples to support that, when they're actually giving examples and not just scare tactics, etc. But we're going to our final argument. Anything about this? Or tigers that needs more stuff. Fun fact about tigers, they like water. And people. They love people, because we're delicious. Argument from authority. Yeah, interesting, most of the big cats really do like water. You can see like tigers in the water and stuff. Good swimmers, so if you're being chased by a tiger, water doesn't help. It's kind of unfortunate. Also, bears are really good climbers, so climbing trees with bears doesn't help. Argument from authority. Now, an argument from authority is when basically you argue something's true because an expert or authority says so. Now, we often have to use these today because we can't be experts at everything. Even people in a field appeal to other authorities, because today you can't be an expert of even a whole field. You'll be an expert within a particular area in a particular field. I mean, a good example is medicine. Way back, you'd just be a doctor. You had like doctor, and then doctor, because they didn't know a lot about stuff other than getting holes in people, which are only bad, and being on fire was bad. That was medicine, fire bad. But nowadays, of course, medicine, we know so much that you have people who are highly specialized, ear, nose, and throat specialists, people who specialize not just in surgery, but particular types of surgery. In academic fields, people who just don't specialize in philosophy, they have particular areas. Like in the case of philosophy is a couple thousand years old, so there's no way one person could even read everything, even once, or even glance over it, let alone be an expert. So we have to appeal to experts and authority. Now, there's a couple ways to use this. One way to use it is to establish a claim that you then use as a premise in your own argument. So you're using the argument from authority, but it's not like your only argument. You're saying this claim is true, then with these other claims, as premises, this claim is true. The other way to use it is just direct support of the point you're trying to make. You just say this is true because the authority says so, and that would be the argument. Now again, the technical form, which people typically don't use unless they're being really precise, is this. The first premise, you establish the person is an authority or expert in a particular subject. You show they make the claim in that subject, and you conclude the claim is true. Now, it's something everyone's done. Like, for example, if you, in a way, footnoting some claims in a way is an argument from authority. You're kind of saying this is true because that person said it. Or if you've done research papers, where you say, like, this is true because so-and-so says so, that's argument from authority. And you've used it even without really probably knowing the name for it. Now, the argument is inductive, so it can always be wrong, not surprisingly. But also, it's a pretty, even when it's strong, it's still pretty weak. Because basically what you're saying is, this is true because an expert says so. So you're saying, they know what they're talking about, they think this is true, so they're probably right. Now, given that it's so weak, why do we use it? Well, in a way, I've kind of answered that, because sometimes it's the only option we've got. If we don't know ourselves, we go with the expert, because it's more likely that they're right than we would be just guessing. So how do you tell when you actually get an expert? Well, first thing is, of course, the person has got to have the correct amount of expertise, education, etc. And this can vary depending on the context. So, for example, if you're going to like a medical doctor, you'd want them to have like at least a MD, hopefully, or at least be really good at cutting people up. Secondly, which is something people often miss, is a person has got to be talking within their area of expertise. Now, some people have multiple areas of expertise. For example, Dolph Lundgren, he's an action, you might have ever seen like Expendables? Yeah, he's in that. He has a master's degree in chemistry from MIT, but acting pays better, obviously way better than teaching. And so he, if you asked him questions about chemistry, he'd give you pretty good answers. Similarly, Peter Weller, he's a guy who played the original RoboCop. He's a professor of classics, teaches classes, so he's good at acting. If you can say RoboCop, good, which I do, and knows that stuff. Similarly, James DeFranco, he's also, I think he's got his PhD now, so he's a good actor and also can teach classes. Yeah, so someone could have multiple areas of expertise. They can know multiple things. And so a person, when they're making a claim, they may be able to talk about multiple things, but they got to at least be an expert in what they're talking about. Now, one common mistake people make is they believe an expert because the person's an expert, but the problem is the person's not talking in their field. For example, do people like George Clooney, Angelina Jolie, etc., and musicians, do they often talk about politics and social issues? Yeah, and they have a right to free expression, but if George Clooney makes a claim about how to solve a crisis in Afghanistan, should you believe him? That doesn't mean he's wrong, but that's not his area of his expertise. Now, of course, advertising often relies on this, because they'll have some famous actor or athlete, take, like Colin, I was mispronounced his last name, Kaepernick. Because my name is hard to pronounce, so I always feel bad butchering other people's names, because mine's been like butchered all the time. Now, does the fact that he's famous, does that show that Nike shoes are therefore the best? No, I mean, he's an athlete, so he probably knows about, shoes and stuff. But of course, one thing is, when you're being, as we'll see, when you're being, paid by Nike, that's a problem as well. So if he's saying, buy some Nike stuff, really, good football player, but, really not an expert on selling people like, say, running shoes or, other attire. Or maybe he is like got a lot of experience with like running shoe technology. Thirdly, this is about another very important one, is that the experts need to agree. Because if we're in a scenario where we're not an expert and we're turning to the experts, we ourselves don't know. If we're going to other experts, we're not experts. So our opinion, is just, we're entitled to express ourselves, but we're not likely to be right. Now, so what we do is, the rational thing to do is go with the majority of qualified experts, because they're more likely to be right than wrong. They could still be wrong, because it's inducted, but they're more likely to be right than wrong. What if there is no agreement? Well, in that case, the only rational thing to do is suspend judgment. Or if you've got to do something, then kind of look at it and go with whichever position seems, the most supported at that moment. For example, take climate change. Does every single scientist say that climate change is real? Yeah, there's like this one guy that says no. But there's a lot of agreement. I'm not, I mean, I took earth science when I was an undergrad, not gonna get science credit, get an A, but I'm not an expert, you know, on climate change. So, but I do know arguments, so I go with the experts, because most of, you know, pretty much every scientist says, yeah, this is real. There's that, you know, one or two people who say no, but why think that the one person is right? I mean, they could be right, but I'm not an expert. And the odds, you know, the odds are, well, did 99% of them just get it wrong and this one person get it right? Possible, but not likely. And it's like if I went to doctors, I went to 100 doctors and 99 said, yeah, you got this, and one person said, no, you're fine. I wouldn't go, ooh, even if I really wanted to believe I was fine, I would say, well, yeah, I probably got that. Now, if there's disagreement, again, in that case, the rational thing to do is just say, well, I don't know. They don't know, I don't know. I don't, you know, it's not my field, they don't know what's going on. So I don't know either. Now, if you do have to make a choice, then it becomes, you know, a more kind of pragmatic matter. For example, take, unfortunately, nutrition. Like, they used to tell us that sugar was, you know, okay, fat was bad. Turns out the researchers at Harvard were paid off by the sugar industry, so sugar is terrible. Similar like eggs. I've been around quite a while, and for a while, you know, they said, eggs are great, eggs are terrible, eggs are great. Having eggs is like smoking a pack of cigarettes. No, eggs are good. I'm like, ah. Yes, in those cases, you know, they change the findings, you know, quite a bit. I mean, there's definitely an answer. Either they are good for you or bad for you, or maybe both. So in that case, I guess the thing to do would be, what my solution with the egg problem was like, eat some, but not too many. So that way if they're bad, then they're not killing you as fast. And if they're good, I guess I'm getting some benefit. Yeah, so in cases like that, like with nutrition and economics, et cetera, and psychology, there's a great deal of disagreement. So in those cases, the thing to do is say, well, I don't know. Or if you've got to do something like eat eggs or not eat eggs, then kind of go with what seems, you know, best supported and most possible. Also rather important is, if you're going to rely on an expert, is that the person is not significantly biased. Now, everyone's got some bias. We all have, you know, leanings, etc. Like if a person's doing research, they want to be right. Even if they're really trying hard to be objective, they still, you know, want to be right. If someone's a Democrat, they may try to be objective about their politics, but they're Democrats, so they lean left. Similarly, Republicans. If someone's a hardcore Republican, they may really try to be objective about, say, the Kavanaugh hearings, but of course they're probably leaning, you know, in favor. So the thing is not that the person has some leaning, because everyone does. It's whether they're biased in a way that is, you know, significant or not. Now, this doesn't mean the person is necessarily wrong. So, for example, if someone who's, well, take a practical example. Many doctors get perks, even like money, from pharmaceutical companies. You know, not all, but many of them do. I feel it could be something, you know, like they take them a lunch, or they give them money to speak at conferences, or they just give them money, you know, straight up. Here's some money. Now, in that case, if your doctor prescribes something to you, you know, like you see like the pharmacy rep, you know, come out of the office, you know, and hand them like an envelope of cash, and then conveniently, you know, 10 minutes later, they're prescribing you that medicine. Now, I've heard of this is great medicine. You should definitely get that. You have, you know, good reason to be suspicious, but it doesn't prove necessarily they're wrong. Maybe the medicine really is really good, but if a person's going to bias to being like paid, they have political leanings, etc., then it gives you grounds of being suspicious. So to the degree that they're biased, the argument is weaker. To the degree they're more objective, the better the argument. Although objective people can be wrong, and someone who's biased could be right, can tell them the truth. Last two. Sometimes the problem is that the person is not really like even an expert, because the field is not even really a thing, so the whole thing is flawed. So for example, if, well, lots of people are trying to sell, they used to call them like snake oil salesmen, which I guess is what I still kind of call them. People just kind of make up fields, like, you know, usually in the medical fields, where it's like doubly bad. And so a person may claim to be an expert at something, but it's not even really a legitimate field. One, I guess, clear example would be people who claim to be psychics. Because if someone really was a psychic, they wouldn't need to be running a 1-800 number because they would know all the answers to like the lottery and just win the lottery. And, you know, they wouldn't have to be talking to people about how their spouse is cheating on them or something. Generally a good guess, because I think it's like, the cheating rate is like 40%, supposedly, what people report. Lastly, authorities have to be properly identified, because when you're assessing an argument by authority, you're saying this claim is true because this authority says so, and you gotta be able to tell, is this authority good? So if you don't know who the authority is, you have no way of knowing the answer to any of these standards. So if the authority is anonymous, then you really can't assess it. Now, it's fairly common these days to have, in reporting, anonymous sources. And what you're doing is basically a double argument from authority. You're basically saying, the person writing this article, their authority is good enough, their expertise is good enough, they can assess the expertise of the anonymous source, who is good enough so their claim is true. So you're doing, basically it's authority, twice removed, which is a really weak argument, but sometimes the only game in town. I mean, to give a recent example from today's headlines, you probably heard about the op-ed in the New York Times, supposedly written by an insider in the Trump administration. They're not identifying the person for obvious reasons, because I'm not sure what Trump would do. Probably would kill him, but things would not go well. I'm thinking it's probably Eric, or maybe the other one. Or maybe it's Trump himself. I'm protecting the world from myself. He's like a president, like a werewolf, he turns into, but at night he's like a really calm, rational person. I once again have saved the world from myself. That could be a good movie, President. Copyright. Hey, why not? Netflix will probably do a whole series on it, because at this point they'll do just about anything. Yeah, that's right, Netflix, it's available. I'll start on the script today. Yeah, so in the op-ed, it's anonymous, so we don't know who it is. So they claim to be like a high official, but Trump has raised a reasonable point. Is the person really, that far from the administration? Is what they're saying is the truth? We don't know who they are. Are they a credible source? Are they honest? Do they really know the inside scoop? And the answer is, we can only hope the New York Times, whoever, edited this, they know what they're doing. So we're saying, the New York Times, they're experts, they believe the person is an expert, so these claims are probably true. So that's the argument from authority. Before pressing on in the remaining minutes, anything about authority that needs more stuff? And then we turn to the beginnings of Western philosophy. Now, in the West, we can kind of trace philosophy back to, not surprisingly, the Greeks. And it kind of, the setting, the context of philosophy begins with the Greek poets. People like our good dead friend Homer, who may have not existed, and others. Now, the poets, of course, wrote a lot of poetry. Now, today when we think about poetry, we typically think about like stuff that rhymes. But poets back then, it essentially meant like writing. So if you have ever read like the Iliad or the Odyssey, it doesn't seem like modern poetry, because it's more like a novel or a story. And so the Greek poets weren't just people, wearing, smoking cigarettes and rhyming stuff and smoking nightclubs. They were writing, books and so forth. Now, probably the greatest of them, who never existed, was Homer. The reason why I say that is because it's believed that Homer, the blind poet, wasn't like a single person. That the Iliad and the Odyssey were stories being passed down, and they were attributed to this person, Homer, because it sounds cooler that there's this blind poet who wrote this great stuff. Now, the Greek poets believed in a natural order for the most part. And again, you'll see this in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And this influence and set a context for the rise of philosophy. Also like, some math and sciencey stuff. Now, in the tales of the Greek poets, we'll use Homer as an example, there are basically four concepts of order or disorder. First, of course, purposeful agents. That's to say, people. In the case of like the Iliad and the Odyssey, human beings and the gods. And of course, the Greek gods were like us, only with like lots of more power. And Thor, although not Greek, in the Marvel movies, is a good example of how the Greeks kind of thought of their gods. They were like us, more powerful, but still had all kinds of flaws, all kinds of defects, and all this bad stuff we did, they did too. And they were more relatable because they're like, they're just like us, except they super powerful. Now, of course, there's also stuff just happening, random, purposeless events, just chaos. Now, one of the big debates still going on in philosophy and science is this, namely, is the universe such that everything happens for a reason, or is it just stuff happens? Now, depending on who you talk to, you get various answers. One way you could have purpose is, of course, God. And we'll look at that in part two. God orders the universe. You could also have an orderly universe that doesn't have God, but has like rules and so forth going on. Aristotle, for example. If Aristotle was here and wasn't dead, you asked him, do you believe in like God? He'd say, nope. If you asked him, do you believe in a purposeful universe? He'd say, sure. Everything does happen for a reason. And this view comes from the Greek term telos. And it's teleology, which is the view that purpose, it's the notion that things happen for a reason, that there's a purpose behind things. Now, an opposing view, of course, is there are some things that are just random. Now, you can believe in both. You can believe, obviously, people do stuff for reasons, and you can also believe that some stuff just happens, that is a random universe. The Greeks also famously believed in the fates, the three norns. And they figure prominently in, if you ever saw Clash of the Titans, the original and the remake, which are actually, the original were actually pretty good. In sort of a Saturday afternoon movie, or like 3 a.m. movie, depending on like what your movie watching is. And the fates basically, they're immoral. They're neither good nor evil, they simply are. And in Greek mythology, at least many versions of it, they weave the threads of the world. So your life is a thread. But of course, it wouldn't be a very interesting story if everything was preset. Although the fates set our fates, we can, through our actions, change things, supposedly. And of course, there's also you can't change things. That fate is fixed and set, predetermined, which is, as you might imagine, an ongoing debate in philosophy as well. Is there free will? Do we have the capacity to be free agents and no future but the one we make for ourselves? Or is everything just set? Where we are just like scripted characters in a play or a video game, just acting out, where everything is preset for us. It's determinism, the basic version is determinism versus free will. Now, the Greek poets eventually started putting in there the idea that sometimes the gods acted from not just like lust or greed or pettiness, but acted from a sense of justice. So you see the stirrings and developments of objective morality. And that's kind of important because it's a move away from just, the gods want it or I want it or what's good is what's good for me, to there being objective goodness, which has all sorts of implications. The idea that the law should not just be for my benefit, for whoever's in power, but the law should be, good for, objectively good for everyone. So you see some interesting stirrings about morality here. And we'll pick up next time talking about the starting point of science and philosophy.